Hello and welcome to the August 7th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I am your chair, Jeffrey Barton, and we receive public comment in a variety of different ways. Public comment for this meeting will be accepted by any of the following means: in person. We will limit public comment to 3 minutes for individuals and 10 minutes for group's primary spokesperson. Written comments may be submitted to pzcommissioners@asheville.nc.gov up until 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. And we'll only hear public comments on agenda items, but of course people are welcome to reach out with their thoughts about just about anything to pzcommissioners@asheville.nc.gov. We read all those comments before the meetings. So I will start the meeting with our administrative section by
do a roll call.
Roll call
Yes.
vote. Thank you. Yeah.
We got it. Chair Barton.
Present.
Vice Chair Greiner.
Present.
Commissioner Cycle.
Present.
Commissioner Wheatley.
Present.
And Commissioner Bean.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Starting the meeting, I'll kick it over to Commissioner Wheatley for land acknowledgement.
As we are gathering today as the Planning and Zoning Commission, the body tasked with reviewing and advising on appropriate land use in the city of Asheville, it is fitting to acknowledge the storied history of this land. We occupy the land of the Cherokee people, who have stewarded and been in relationship with these mountains and waterways from time immemorial. This land is occupied through violence, oppression, coercion, broken treaties, and forced relocation. Please join me in expressing respect and gratitude for the present-day Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Cherokee Nation, and the United Gidua Band of Cherokee, and all of our indigenous neighbors, as well as the past and present marginalized community members, as we seek to join in the healing of the indelible traumas that are embedded in these lands.
Thank you. Next, we will approve the minutes from our July 11th, 2024 meeting and concurrently approve the special use permit ordinance and findings of fact and conclusions of law from the July 11th, 2024 meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review? Any questions about the minutes or the findings of fact and conclusions of law?
I'll just reiterate, I appreciate the level of detail in the minutes these days. It's a huge boost.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain, I wasn't there.
So, interesting clarification. Do we vote on meeting minutes that we don't attend the meeting? It was my understanding.
The question is, did you have the opportunity to review them? And if you reviewed them and you didn't have any questions or corrections, I know you wouldn't be able to say, well, it's missing this name or vote, but you don't have to recuse yourself. I mean, if you've had the opportunity to review them, they looked fine to you.
All right, then I'll vote in affirmative.
Thank you. So while we're on the topic of last meeting, we're looking ahead to next meeting. Mr. Palmquist, did you want to do some housekeeping?
Yeah, it was just kind of coming to my attention that we have a lot of items that seem to be heading to the September meeting, like 7 public hearings. So a couple options. That's including that, yep.
Yeah.
So we have a couple options that we could have a mid-month meeting between the September and October meetings, or we could start the meeting earlier, like around 3 o'clock, kick it off, and then take a break for lunch around 5 or 6 for half an hour or whatever, and then reconvene to wrap it up, which is a longer day, but it's one day. And also, it is the week following Labor Day, so kind of checking in to make sure folks will be around for that Wednesday, since some folks like to take vacation that first week in September.
So September 4th, any feedback on starting earlier, splitting the meeting?
I think
Okay.
at least in one of the applicants' case, they've been continuing for like 6 months.
Which one?
I think it's 130 Rock Hill Road.
Right.
I'm confident at this point that, you know, time doesn't seem to be super sensitive for them. So if we need to reduce the agenda, I would say that the person who's been on our agenda for so long, you know, I guess we're not strictly available at their convenience, I don't think.
We can consider that. They indicated that they, that date would work for them. They're also technically under a zoning violation, so we're kind of trying to get them resolved if possible, or at least heard as soon as possible. So I think we'd be a little remiss to move that one against their judgment.
Yeah, so they're in a zoning violation.
Correct.
I hate to say it, I'm sure there's some short-term rentals in this town that are in a zoning violation, and we're not bending over backwards for them.
Well, we can certainly consider it.
I'm fine doing earlier as well.
I could do it earlier. I don't know if I'll still be on the commission, depending on how things go, but I'm available earlier. So.
Okay.
Everyone will be here that week. No one's taking vacation. I know Steph and Janice will probably be out that day and week. So if we wanted to move it, we'd have the benefit of both of these folks being around. Yeah.
Yeah, and risk an attendance.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically 3 conditional zonings, 1 rezoning, the Asheville Sanctuary Master Plan Amendment, and that SUP at Rock Hill Road. So it'd be,
Yeah, and I didn't hear anything about, is anti-displacement firmly on the schedule for next month?
we have a zoning text amendment penciled in as well. I don't know what it's going to entail.
We're going to talk about that in our next item.
Okay, yeah, because, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's project level issues, and then there's actual community level issues that are probably more pressing.
So I'm hearing no objection to starting early
Okay.
that day.
So maybe we'll try to start around 3 p.m.
Commissioner Cycle, are you available?
I don't have any objection to that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your extra time committed.
Sure.
We can start at noon if we firmly commit to anti-displacement discussion.
So will you make the decision on what time, or what's the next step?
Let's. I think we can. Sorry. I think we can decide on 3 p.m. and then the agenda will note that. I'll have it on the website as such. I'll make sure all the applicants are aware of it. And yeah, I don't think we have to vote or anything, but I think we can decide on it today.
Let's plan to start at 3 with a planned break.
Yeah.
And maybe you can insert that in the agenda just so applicants
5:30,
know.
5 to 6, when folks like to have dinner.
5:30.
Okay.
Yeah. Sound good? You all? Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Next up in the administrative section, we have updates from committee liaisons and work groups. A lot of activity this past month, so we'll start with our liaison to the Multimodal Transportation Committee, Commissioner Wheatley. Any update?
Yeah, in multimodal transportation, we spent a lot of time talking about the Wilma Dykeman extension and the planning process associated with that, so that's one to keep on our radar. Additionally, what was kind of brought up and discussed, I think most directly related to this board presently, is the Patton Avenue corridor feasibility study, of which there's a working group, and to my understanding doesn't include any of the Planning and Zoning Commission, which I think it would be interesting to hear what everyone here has for a perception on that, because this includes rezoning of, or potential rezoning of, currently state-owned property that's basically in the, what do they call it? Basically the Cloverleaf interchange there. And you know, the idea that the western entrance into the city is going to be targeted as a mixed-use corridor. So to me, my ears kind of perked up, and I thought, you know, there may be some land use policy in there or potential amendments to the zoning map or UDO. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or discussion on that, but this is basically Patton Avenue from the Bowen Bridge east into the city and how that land is anticipated to be used.
Thanks for that. Thanks for tracking that. I think we've been talking about all the changes that will happen with the 26 work for some time. So it'll be interesting to see that take place. Does staff have any feedback around the process for disposition of DOT property?
Yes. So Steph Monson-Dahl, Planning and Urban Design Director, and our team manages the downtown Patton Avenue Gateway Corridor project. So the main purpose of that project is to determine a street design that will connect to the NCDOT project just east of the Smoky Park Bowen Bridge. So mostly that's the intersection starting at Klingman Avenue, although we're looking a little bit to the west of that. And Mr. Wheatley is correct that at certain point that NCDOT is finished with construction is really the time frame. There, we anticipate that there will be surplus property that NCDOT will be disposing of. At this time, NCDOT cannot tell us what that property will be or what will look like. As most people know, they're going through what they call an O&R, like a refinement process, because their project came in over budget, and that will impact any of the surplus property. Additionally, as they do construction for the next 10 years, and they are starting on the southern end and then working their way up to the north end of the project, which really is at about Broadway. You know, there will be some design decisions that have to be made that will also impact the final lines for those. They have let the city know that they don't intend to be able to have us actually do any land use planning for those areas until the very end of the project. So while we're not actually talking about rezoning at this time, it is kind of like a tertiary layer of consideration and on top of that overall purpose, which is really transportation-based. And I will say that we are pausing right at this moment with the project because of the O&R process. We have come as far as we can without knowing what their final design is going to be. There is an on-ramp proposed right there, for example, on Patton Avenue that they have discussed removing at some point. That would impact the width of the roadway and would impact our design. But we're happy to, at a later meeting or through a memo, provide you with a little bit more of a detailed update on this project and have conversations about how Planning and Zoning Commission members can and should participate. So mostly there are community stakeholders, Multimodal Transportation Commission, Downtown Commission, and Design Review Committee members at this time.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
One quick question. Understood about not knowing the extent of rezoned property potential. That said, has there been any talk about initiating a future land use map amendment exercise, in anticipation, or would that kind of follow once we have a solid understanding of the parcels?
I mean, it would follow, but we basically have an understanding of what that future land use might look like, and the aim of the transportation project is to get a real urban form in the area, so we're focusing on that design first. That would correlate with the land use that we're seeing, basically an extension of downtown all the way to the bridge. And then yes, future land use map, if there are new parcels, would happen once they become parcels.
Great.
Anybody else have questions? Okay.
Thanks for that.
Okay.
And thanks for the update, Commissioner Wheatley.
One more quick update for MMTC, which is that the next meeting is going to be held August 28th at the Burton Street Community Center. it's a really cool opportunity for the community to engage. It's open to the public, and anyone who has some desire to be engaged in multimodal, active transportation, pedestrian safety, that would be a great place for them to get engaged. And it's a really cool opportunity to kind of roll up your sleeves and see how their planning process is. Finally, they took time to acknowledge a death in the community from a cyclist in East Asheville near Lowe's. And I'd just like to take a second to kind of recognize that land use is not distinctly separate from the way people travel through our community, and that I'd like to just encourage everyone to reflect on the role that active transportation plays in our community and our goals in the comp plan, and just kind of, take time to appraise that maybe our city's not as safe as we would like in that way, and that we have an opportunity to positively impact that on this board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
next-
before I forget, can we continue those missing items when we're done with this section?
Sure, we could do it now.
If you want to, at your
Yeah, why not? We'll take a quick pause in the
Thank you.
updates and go ahead and continue a couple of agenda items. So the applicant for item number 6 on our agenda requests to amend adopted urban village master plan for property located on Hill Street has requested a continuance. Do I have a motion to continue item 6?
So moved.
That's still date certain, September 4.
Thank you. Till date certain, September 4th, now starting at 3 o'clock. Do I hear a motion?
So moved, yes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And then, should have included this, item number 7, we had a zoning text amendment listed on our agenda, and staff has requested to continue this to a date uncertain future PZC meeting.
Correct.
Do I have a motion to continue that item?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, so we've continued 2 items, leaving us just a presentation and a amendment to a conditional zoning. So we'll head back up to the administrative portion and the committee liaisons and work group updates. Next up, I'm sure this will be a much shorter one. Commissioner Cycle, any update from Soil Erosion and Stormwater Review Committee?
No updates.
Commissioner, I was wondering, has that commission met or board met since you've been assigned the liaison?
No.
Chair, are you familiar with the last time that board's met?
I'm not.
Staff, are
Yeah, that's my understanding is they meet infrequently, only as needed. Yeah,
What constitutes a need?
it states on the website that it meets on an as-needed basis, and let's see here, I'm trying to read the purpose of the committee. But I think it is fairly irregular. But that the clerk's office did request a liaison from Planning and Zoning Commission as per their bylaws.
wait, what was that? I'm sorry.
The clerk's office requested, per the operating rules procedure of the Soil Erosion and Stormwater Review Committee, that we have a P&Z liaison to them, which is why Jason's on it.
Maybe, just a request before our next meeting, it would be helpful to understand what our role with them is. We get from time to time public comment related to erosion concerns of development, and if this is a body that we have the potential to seek guidance from on those issues, it would be helpful to know.
From my limited understanding, since I haven't met with them yet, it's related. They meet related to conflicts that come up during stormwater review process. So, whatever that.
Maybe like
Well,
an appeals board.
Yes, it's like an appeals.
Okay.
Okay, I'll look at the rates, okay? I can tell you this.
Anything else on that one? Next up, the Housing Work Group of Planning and Zoning Commission met on July 26th. Commissioner Bean, Faircloth, and myself. Any comments from that, or I have a couple of notes.
Please go ahead.
We talked about, as Commissioner Wheatley has underscored earlier this meeting, the need for urgency around anti-displacement approach to address community concerns and to help us move forward with, some pro-housing amendments to the UDO. We also reviewed a possible overlay concept that was drafted by Commissioner Wheatley to kind of start the conversation around what could constitute an anti-displacement approach. There was general consensus that there was need for community participation and support, on the drafting of any anti-displacement approach, be it an overlay or other measures.
Yeah,
So-
and for what it's worth, at your recommendation, Commissioner Burton, I watched the City Council agenda briefing. I don't remember the date of that meeting, but it had already happened, and Council had an interesting conversation that was pretty wide-ranging, honestly, but about upcoming UDO proposed changes, but also talking about anti-displacement, and it seemed like there was at least consensus in that conversation that covered a lot of ground, but seemed to be consensus that the council is eager to see and to deal with and take up issues of anti-displacement prior to dealing with a lot of the UDO amendments. And I found that encouraging because I do think a lot of community members are eager to have some protections in place. And then I think that could sort of pave the way for a little more community support of more gentle density, things like missing middle or greater density along transit corridors, if people felt like there were some protections in there first. So that made sense to me, and I was excited to see that conversation from council.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering here if the working group had any discussion around our role as a board, engaging in surveying the community, as well as our opportunity as a board to enact public engagement directly on this matter and potentially take a more leadership role in kind of developing the next steps. Because right now we've been hearing about anti-displacement since at least the end of last year, and we are hearing about, for instance, community continuity in the Shiloh neighborhood plan for the last 15 years, and an overlay that was adopted by City Council within their neighborhood plan. And so, I don't see anyone from their community here today, but it feels as though, being the board that is charged with understanding all the adopted plans, maintaining the comp plan and amending it as necessary, and, ensuring that, we got a boat with a rudder on it. It seems like a time that maybe if the working group feels comfortable, or anyone else, we could exercise some of those objectives we have as a board to engage the public directly.
I think that's a great point. No, the Housing Working Group did not discuss kind of the role of Planning and Zoning Commission more actively brokering community conversations, but I think that, at least speaking for myself, I'm eager to listen and learn and see our way through gaining community support for measures that would increase our housing supply while also providing comfort and safeguards to vulnerable communities. So I'm certainly happy to participate and even lead some of those discussions. I think maybe we have a presentation by staff that might touch on that, and we can revisit the conversation here in a bit.
Excellent.
The only thing I would add to that, Commissioner Wheatley, is that in conversations or engagement that I've pursued with some sort of more designated vulnerable communities, those communities often want to represent themselves and have been pretty clear about that in some cases. And so I'm, in responding to that, reluctant to push, as a member of planning and zoning, a leadership role in crafting what would be the protections that those vulnerable communities want when some of them are saying that they would rather speak for themselves. So I just don't really know what the right role to play there is. I'm with you, that eager to listen, eager to be in those conversations, asking where this role or this commission or community advocates or what have you can be supportive of any asks that those vulnerable communities are putting out there, or priorities that they are sharing or expressing. But it doesn't make sense to me for us as a commission, as a city-appointed commission, to be in the leadership role of crafting what that policy would be.
Yeah, it's interesting because also in the community, you hear people say they haven't been presented anything. And so I think, culturally, what's happening can be really difficult, where words are really interesting because they don't mean the same thing to every person. And when you're trying to communicate across cultures and being thoughtful, and I think there can be gaps in the way that maybe the board uses the language, staff uses language, community uses language. And so I would just say that 15 years is a really long time. And there are people who are, very upset, who have, kind of the privilege and opportunity to sit in these rooms on a regular basis and represent their interests and feel comfortable doing that. And this is an environment where maybe not everyone feels comfortable coming to City Hall, not everyone feels comfortable engaging at the same level. And so taking the time, when I say leadership role, I mean taking the time to designate time to be in these communities, like multimodal transportation is in the Burton Street Community Center, and having those conversations. I would say, maybe stretching our own comfort zone and being willing to be in and around more difficult conversations or conversations that aren't super comfortable.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. Why don't let's table this and revisit once we've heard from staff here in a little bit. Moving on to the next report back. This isn't a formal liaison position, but I just wanted to acknowledge that a few of us did attend the Urban Forestry Commission's special meeting they had last week to talk about some proposed UDO amendments and reforms to the landscaping standards and the tree canopy preservation ordinance. So Commissioner Bean, Wheatley, and myself attended to listen into the discussion, kind of hear the journey that has happened to lead to some proposals that aren't quite ready, but may be coming to us soon for adoption. Any sort of reaction or takeaways from that meeting?
Well, I don't know if this is exactly an answer to your question. I didn't have a reaction or takeaway to the meeting that I wanted to share necessarily. It was really an interesting discussion. But the invitation that I received to the meeting came from someone who sent an email to all of the commission, encouraging us to attend and be a part of that discussion and pay attention to potential changes to tree canopy ordinances and or landscaping standards and other things because of the urgency and the concerns about preserving tree canopy in the city. And the comment suggested in various ways in different language that the prospect of denser residential development in town was actually problematic for climate change. And that, I don't represent Mountain True on this commission, but I do work for Mountain True, and Mountain True is an environmental advocacy organization that's been present in and serving Western North Carolina for over 40 years. And in my role at that organization, we would disagree with that assumption that person was saying about the benefits for the climate of building in and up in our cities and towns and encouraging denser residential development in our communities as a way to mitigate urban sprawl and reduce vehicle miles traveled, increase energy efficiency. There's just a number of benefits to that kind of development for climate change more broadly. And there's a lot of scientific research and data and analysis to back that up, which is why environmental organizations like the Sierra Club have also endorsed denser development. So I feel like I very much agree with the Urban Forestry Commission's concerns around preserving tree canopy. I think there's a lot of benefit to that, a lot of good that comes of that. And also, I think we can do both. I think we can preserve urban tree canopy in really smart, thoughtful ways at the same time as we increase our residential, put more homes over people's heads in the city center and cities and towns across the region, and have less of a carbon footprint as a society. So just, in case there are other folks out there who feel like the work of this commission or land use or urbanist sort of advocates who are enthusiastic about our built environment, who feel like, I think some people feel like those goals are at odds with folks who are enthusiastic about protecting our planet and taking care of trees. I just would say that I disagree. I think those things coexist, and it's important to deal with both, and we can have both.
Yeah,
That wasn't really a response to
No,
how
thank
the
you
meeting
for
went,
that.
but
well, I would like to piggyback on that, which is to say that what I heard from the meeting was a pretty large amount of frustration with the ability to kind of navigate the idea from, a concept and a proposal from a board or a commission all the way through actually city council and amending the UDO, and just maybe a lack of clarity about what that path looks like and good ways or the critical path to make those modifications to the UDO and to improve our community. I think all of us here are very open and willing to have dialogue with any other board and commission. And we're very interested in the overarching goals of our community. And land use is obviously very intimately related with the tree canopy and the environmental impact of our community. And we're thinking about that continually. There are critical things that I think, Jason next to me would support, Commissioner Cycle would support, about maybe like a heritage tree or identifying significant trees within our community and ensuring that those are documented thoughtfully and protected. And I want to say that I think everyone up here is in support of that, and that we may have just a slightly different vision about the priorities as we move in that direction. And it was a great opportunity to meet those folks.
That's a good segue for the last item under the report backs. Just wanted to acknowledge and thank staff for convening a planning board summit of the leadership of the boards and commissions and advisory groups that the Planning and Urban Design Department orchestrates. And it was a really great opportunity on July 30th to just meet and hear what some of the other advisory boards are working towards, and also to hear kind of a collaborative vision from staff on how zoning reform can happen, with the Planning and Zoning Commission occupying kind of a special role in the process of being the conduit in collaboration with staff on bringing forth zoning reform. So that was a really great session. Commissioner Wheatley, Vice Chair Greiner, and I attended, and look forward to more collaboration with the other advisory boards. I was going to add one other discussion item here, but just for the sake of time, I might ask to kick it to the end of the agenda. We have received, the application date has now passed to fill the vacancies on our commission, and City Council later this month will be interviewing interested applicants. At our retreat this year, we kind of started talking about our core competencies and the composition of this commission. I'd love to engage in a dialogue with the full commission around sort of our composition and desired attributes as a full body, instead of tacking that into the administrative section. Could we have a motion to amend the agenda and add an item to the end so that we can get through the applicant that's here, not take the time? I'd make a motion to add a discussion item for Planning and Zoning Commission composition and membership to the end of our current agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, so we'll add an item to the end to discuss that. So that concludes the administrative portion of the agenda.
Chair Barton, just real quickly, I did find the reference to the Soil Erosion and Stormwater Review Committee, 712.6, it's in our UDO, H, appeals. The sole role of the committee is to review the stormwater administrator's decision for clear error, decisions regarding billing of stormwater utilities on property charges. So it is a very defined role, and the body, the commission, has to include a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I had never had occasion to look at that either, but it's not what you think of in terms of these other committees that you might be going to that have this role in coming up with policies and things like that.
So that's specifically fees? Did I hear that right?
That's what it looks like.
Okay.
The stormwater administrator's assessing fees on properties, and then if she makes an error, or whoever the administrator is makes an error, that's what the body, when they meet. And I guess we must not have very many appeals.
Yeah, okay. So that being said, Chair Barton, maybe I can just inform you in the pre-meeting instead of each meeting asking if there are updates. I can just inform you if there's any appeals.
Sounds great. Thank you, Ms. Ashley.
Sure.
Next up, we have a presentation on implementation options for housing supportive unified development ordinance amendments. Staff presenting is not Chris Collins, but is
Sorry.
Steph Munson.
Upgrade.
Thanks, Steph Munson-Dahl, Planning and Urban Design. Really appreciate you, Chair, and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some of this is going to be a little bit of a reminder, because you did hear about it at the Board and Commission Summit, but hopefully this is good for the people who are in the room and the people who were not attending. And then we've got a couple discussion questions at the end that I think are the real meat of this. So just kind of our starting point here is that City Council every year has an annual retreat. They create priorities, or actually adjust their priorities and maybe adjust the goals underneath them. And so equitable and affordable housing and stability is one of just 5 priority areas that the City Council has this year. These are the 3 goals that sit underneath that priority area. So how are we going to meet those goals? Well, we've been talking a lot about updating the UDO, and as Susan mentioned at the council agenda briefing on July 18th, I'm losing it. That's right. On July 18th, there was a large discussion about how council wanted to see those updates to the UDO, how affordable housing fits in, how anti-displacement fits in. And really what came out of that as an understanding is that we wanted a real clear initiative around affordable housing and stability, right? Equitable, affordable housing and stability. And out of that, what we have landed on with the refined direction from council is a refined approach to updating the UDO that now says we are going to be partnering on, this one hand is the affordable housing implementation, another hand here is the UDO updates. We're going to tie it all together with an anti-displacement strategy and do it in a really kind of logical way, which means that the first focus is not going to be on residential housing amendments, but instead, while we're working and kicking off a lot of review of potential anti-displacement strategies, we're focusing on corridors, urban nodes, districts like downtown and other places. Then, As we have anti-displacement measures that are better understood by the community, by members of planning and zoning, by city council, and there is a comfort level that we have things in place, either underway or executed, we will be looking at those residential district changes. So underneath all of that is an attempt to cut the red tape or streamline our bureaucratic processes and not forget that that's part of the goals. So reduce barriers to construction. That's one of the barriers to construction is our processes. So does that overarching approach make sense, or does everybody get that part before I move on?
Could you just remind us on the timeline for formal adoption of the affordable housing plan by council?
Okay, so this is Sasha Vertinsky. She's our housing officer, and she'll talk to you about what that process is.
Sasha Vertinsky, as I was just saying, I didn't come prepared to speak, but there isn't going to be a formal adoption of the affordable housing plan. We expect the plan to be published around September 4th, 5th. And we may pursue going to council to present it formally. We did a work session with them back on June 25th, so they have pretty good familiarity with it already. We're using it similar to the National Alliance Plan on Homelessness as a guiding document, so we will start implementing right away. So,
Do you plan or have on your future schedule to present that as well here?
I do, and I was hoping to be here September, but I'm out of town that week that you all are meeting, so I was going to come in October, unless you have a mid-month meeting or something, which I could come to, but yeah.
Two other things that are on this specific slide that I want to point out is that our anti-displacement strategy now, we know for sure that it's not going to just be a regulatory strategy, AKA some kind of, overlay or other changes to our zoning ordinances. This means that we really can work intentionally at looking at financing mechanisms, programs, and other kinds of investments to make a real difference. So those things will be paired up, and that's why that partnership between community and economic development, planning and urban design, and support from our equity and inclusion office and our development services office and others is really important. The other thing I wanted to mention from this slide is that while I'm giving you the highlights today, and we're going to talk about how we're going to get there together with the next batch of amendments that's going to council at the end of this, something to keep in mind is that we're presenting a fuller roadmap to City Council in September. So these are highlights, full roadmap in September. So what does that mean when we focus on corridors and nodes? We've already identified what some of these things are going to look like. We're going to look at HB zoning, we're going to look at RB zoning, we're going to look at any of the other districts as appropriate. These are districts usually that are along our corridors or that really support dense mixed-use development already. We're going to be focusing on providing incentives for housing and affordable housing, and we're going to be tying those to public benefit. We do everything for the public's health, safety, and welfare. So that's kind of our goal, and affordable housing fits right into that. Along the way, as I mentioned, we reduce barriers and streamline review processes. This is our base only. And what I'd say is what we're trying to accomplish, and you'll see a timeline here in a second, is what can we get done? Everybody wants to do something fairly quickly. What can we get done together by October? So keep that in mind. Anything else that's in your head can get on this list. So, residential parking minimums, development review level thresholds, and the things we talked about like HB and RB setbacks, things that were kind of are ready to go, that's all in the hopper as well for that October batch one. So, we might need to review some of these and analyze and look at the impact that they would have on neighborhoods, but otherwise we have a really good solid base for our first batch. Here's a draft schedule. As I mentioned, our neighborhood planning and anti-displacement measures happen throughout this initiative. So they've been happening already, and they're going to keep happening for the next year. And this initiative, we think, is like a 12 to 18-month-long initiative. The full presentation on a roadmap is going to happen in September. In October, we would like to be at council at their second meeting with batch one of those amendments, okay? So we have to get through P&Z, PED, and then go to city council. So that means that next month in September is when, between now and September, we do all the work so we can get all of the votes in the review approval process completed. Between October and in January, we'll work on the following batch. That includes, again, anti-displacement, but maybe a little bit, hopefully, more emphasis on it. And I'll just pause here to say, the Legacy Neighborhood Association is meeting at the end of this month to do their own work on anti-displacement. So yesterday we sent them a packet of information, just like some data that we have about your neighborhoods that we put together. They've also collected some data. We have sent the maps. We have pointed out to them like the different corridor zoning, like how to use simplicity to determine where those zoning districts are. And so they are wanting to do that on their own instead of working with us right now. So this timeline incorporates that pause to allow them to do that work right up front at the end of August. And the idea is that we would be getting input from them in September. In October, we can go to council. It doesn't mean that we are necessarily going to have all of the anti-displacement work figured out, but it is possible in an optimistic sense that we could have an idea around something we might be able to pass in October. If not, we definitely might have an idea of something we can pass in between October and January. So this follows the bundle cadence. This is the same. This follows the bundle cadence that we talked about as far as doing UDO updates. And the idea is to try to continually bring amendments to City Council. This is mostly a repeat, so I'm not going to spend time on that unless you want me to review it. And this is what I really want to talk about, is how are we going to get from today to having a batch of text amendments to take to City Council in October, and then also the process for considering the regulatory anti-displacement proposals. Before I do that, I'm going to share with you the framework for anti-displacement. So we did not include this in the presentation because we were still working with this on City Council, and they just received this information yesterday. It is still in refinement, but the general gist of that anti-displacement effort is that we focus on 4 things. And as I mentioned, that for each of those 4 things, it is paired both financing, programs, and regulations. So the first item is to streamline access to affordable housing for those actually facing displacement. There are 5 action steps underneath that action step, and one of them is to update zoning in transportation corridors and mixed-use districts. The aim of that is to actually produce the housing that people who are facing displacement can access. There are other action steps underneath that goal. So options include requiring all developments that receive city funding to accept rental assistance. Another one is to develop an affordable housing centralized waitlist and application portal, and this is something that the community has been talking about for a while. The second action item that we're talking about, or the second goal area for our anti-displacement strategy, is to increase access and funding for programs that help low-income individuals or families actually stay in their home. So that looks like home repair and tax relief for low-income families. And those are probably the 2 biggest things that I hear about when I talk to legacy neighborhoods. The third strategy includes altering zoning in displacement-sensitive neighborhoods and promoting appropriate residential infill in neighborhoods. So this is our overlay. So this is the strategy where we could consider an overlay that preserves existing zoning in areas vulnerable to displacement. And we also allow neighborhood-scale multifamily development in housing-ready neighborhoods. That's the one I think that you all have the most work in. And the fourth strategy is to tie increases in development rights to significant affordability requirements that make it, and also to make it easier to develop housing overall. So action steps on this is really just removing barriers to multifamily housing development along corridors and mixed-use districts, increasing regulatory incentives citywide to increase housing production. These look like benefit tables, incentives, density bonuses. And the third part is to modify review thresholds for developments within dedicated affordable units. So there's a lot of action steps in there. This is all year one. This is a pretty ambitious plan, but what it does is it crosswalks all the recommendations from Missing Middle and the affordable housing plan and just prioritizes the ones that we think that we can address first, that we think we have heard the most from the community about, and that we actually have the resources right now to put into play. Caveat, one of the big things that is a milestone in our process is that in November there is an affordable housing bond. That affordable housing bond, if it passes, would allow us to move money around so that we could fund many of these strategies that are going to actually act in partnership with regulatory changes. If we do not receive that funding, we just have to go for a Plan B. The regulatory changes don't rely on funding. It just wouldn't have that other piece. So again, while I know that we want to come forth with an anti-displacement strategy that looks like an overlay, like say at the next council meeting, we are waiting to do that community engagement work with the legacy neighborhoods. We talk to them every 2 weeks. We know that we'll be able to meet with them after they have this workshop at the end of August. They're going to be able to tell us what they have found, give us the questions that they're most wanting to be addressed, and that we are also able to show them 3 to 5 different options of regulatory changes and get their input on those. We are also going to be working neighborhood by neighborhood to do things like a neighborhood preservation overlay in Shiloh. We know that's in the plan. That is a thing that they may be interested in. Burton Street is most interested in potentially the tax relief piece and the home repair piece. So we have 2 separate streams going on, is the overarching regulatory work that looks at displacement citywide and how we can address that. And then we have neighborhood by neighborhood work. And my last piece on that is to say that the legacy neighborhoods are important and they have a shared thread, right? And we all know that they're very different, but there are also other vulnerable areas in our community. So as we move forward, it'll be really important for our verbiage to reflect that places like there's a project that you all were slated to see tonight that basically is the area that was Stumptown, right? And that area was probably our first real urban renewal area in the city in the 50s and the 60s with the creation of I-240 and the highway. So we need to think about displacement of people who are still in those areas as well that might not be in those communities. Do you guys have any questions about what I've presented, or are you interested in having a discussion about your role in either of these 2 processes moving forward?
Lots of questions.
Okay.
But I guess I can start with a couple of questions. I appreciate the kind of thorough and thoughtful framework for addressing anti-displacement. I think that's something that we've been waiting to hear, and those 4 buckets that you outlined certainly sound like they align well with the draft affordable housing plan that we've seen and seem to make sense. What's concerning to me is we have, as a commission, approved several zoning text amendments, several of them addressing, many of these issues that we're kind of packaging in buckets now. But it feels like process-wise, we are embarking on new planning efforts when it has felt for many months that we're embarking on implementation efforts. So that's a concern I'll just share, especially the missing middle housing study was specifically invested in more substantially by City Council to include anti-displacement as a section of that report. So we have good baseline information. We certainly always need more feedback from communities impacted. But I'm a little concerned that with this pivot to corridors, we are back in the planning stages and losing momentum on the implementation. That's not a question, sorry. That's a statement.
That's okay. If you have a question, do you want, I mean, I can stand here or I can sit.
Well, I have a question. Council has been talking about the shortage of housing supply in our city since, I don't know, I think our first comp plan was like 2008, 2005, 2002, I'm hearing from the audience. So 2002, there was a housing shortage. The natives were removed, the Cherokee people were removed from this land due to a land shortage. So I don't think, when I hear this, we're aiming to solve real substantial community needs through added bureaucracy, added white supremacy, added barriers. And the people in our community who are in the highest need, working class people, BIPOC individuals, every barrier we add is a barrier that's actually already too high. It's a barrier that folks are having a hard time getting over. We see this with the increase of the number of folks experiencing houselessness. And we see this represented through the housing market with perpetually increasing single-family home prices. It appears apartment prices have stabilized a little bit, but only after they went up 22% in a year. So, yeah, I would say there's a big concern about urgency because what we put forward with thresholds, and project level thresholds in particular, is in alignment with ordinances that were passed in 2014, which brought in density incentives for affordable housing. So when we talk about these bundles with folks, whether that be council members who don't understand or staff who weren't here in 2014, this is a long-term objective of this city to activate corridors, including when we spent 2 or 3 years from 2017 to 2020 on the Urban Centers Initiative, which I think only resulted in lawsuits and spot zoning. And what this commission has done has worked diligently to broaden perspective, to show that small changes along corridors that align with equity, that align with opportunity within our community, they're readily available for anyone who's brave enough to take them up. And it sounds like council's, in this case, not supportive of expanding opportunities along transit corridors, which we've approved unanimously at this commission twice. Is that the basic underlying result of, or summary of this presentation? That there's no appetite for improvement of the city?
I would not represent it as that, and I'm not going to represent city council, but I absolutely hear you, and I know that it can be frustrating for people working to make a big positive change in our world to not see it happen. That's all I can say right now.
I think I share a frustration as well, but I'd like to see a more outlined timeline. I mean, it seems very open-ended in terms of how long it'll take. And maybe if there's a little bit tighter timeline, we could feel that things were moving forward better.
I appreciate your comments, and if Chair, if you would allow me, I'd like to make a comment back. So on the timeline, we understand that as we move forward, the timeline will become more refined, but not knowing whether or not a bond is going to pass or a certain member of council is going to support an item moving forward, we're just not able to. So we're going to ask you, and I feel like I'm having a little bit of a repeat of standing in front of the UFC the other day. You know, we're going to ask you for some grace and space, because I can't, if I can't make promises or create more expectations that our staff cannot meet at this time. I think that would not be a great thing. So if there's a way for us to make, what I want to be able to do and say is, yes, Byron, I want to do something that helps you feel better about this project. I want to have a conversation with you, and I want to get into the nitty-gritty of how this is going to work and how we need to pull together as a community and get on the same page so that we can deliver something to council in October that they can pass. I want to have that conversation.
So how could, as a community member, how could I support a bond if we can't even get free regulation done? How could I support a bond that's full of $80 million worth of promises if we literally can't get a zoning text amendment done that was clearly intended in 2014?
I appreciate that that might be a rhetorical question, but since I'm up here, I'll also say that we have an excellent track record with spending and the bond money, and have a plan for all of the other pieces that haven't been spent. And I believe that was just shared maybe with someone in the media and city council. So I will direct you to your city council members to ask about that, because they know what staff has done with the bond, and I would like to focus. I hear you as a rhetorical question, but I'd like
It attached
to.
to Haw Creek at the last meeting. They were promised sidewalks from the 2016 bond, I believe, that still
Yeah.
hadn't been delivered. And those are sidewalks.
Well-
We're talking about housing.
And we can have a philosophical question here about timelines and also about setting expectations. As those of you who have worked on capital projects and building know, it's really difficult to say when something is going to be done. You know that as well. Things come up. There are unexpected springs that are underneath something, or people walk out from a job and don't come back, and you have to fill that position. And as we have committed to doing a better job with a lot of our timelining and the scoping of projects, and we are doing, I think, an excellent job of delivering projects. And we tend to hear about the projects that were not exactly a success or weren't delivered on time or through expectations, and not about the ones that were. So I absolutely appreciate everyone's concern. They're all valid. Moving forward, I'll just underscore that it's going to take us getting together and having an agreed upon process to look at these proposed amendments. So there were a couple things that we talked about earlier. One of them was to potentially set up mid-month meetings or special meetings where this commission would spend that time working only on UDO amendments and making sure that it was done in a public space, so that folks from places like the Urban Forestry Commission or the Sustainable Advisory Committee could be at the table, and we could build that kind of consensus moving forward so that there was strong support. That was something that was tossed out. A really small thing that I've put up here is that we also have created an input form, and this is for all boards, and we're going to share it with you, the members of Planning and Zoning as well, to eliminate having a lot of deliberation and needing to have special meetings, that people asynchronously can give any kind of input that they want about corridors moving forward, and that we would, at that kind of special work session or meeting, be able to go through all of that comment at one time. And then as far as the anti-displacement proposals go, I am really excited to work with Legacy Neighborhoods and others after they get done with their workshop at the end of August and hear what they've come up with. And while we would love to be coming out here and showing you some of the things that we've come up with, I think the proper form is to wait until they have seen them and that they have provided some kind of input on them. So, I apologize today to not be able to put something really exciting in front of you that makes you feel like there is some progress on this front. And, but I am excited to be able to come back after we talk with all the folks from those 5 neighborhoods and other places.
I'm encouraged that those conversations are happening and that workshop will occur and provide some meaningful feedback from the communities themselves. I do want to ask a couple of specific questions. One is around, I think I saw in the timeline, really anything addressing neighborhood zoning is parked until January. Am I reading that correct? That basically we're saying there will only be work in batch 1 and 2 on corridors.
So what we are saying for sure is that until there's a threshold of anti-displacement work that has been met, that satisfies, I would say, both the community and council members, we're not going to be asking folks on council to look at a lot of zoning changes inside residential neighborhoods. I can't tell you what that threshold is. And we can only deliver solutions to them as fast as we can work together.
I hear that. I think that that to me is the most concerning, that we have spent so much time and effort and energy collectively as a community on this missing middle housing report, have tangible policy recommendations. I certainly agree that they need further feedback from the vulnerable communities as part of the anti-displacement work within that report. But we do have a process outlined in the UDO to solicit feedback from council. They can put something on their agenda, vote to approve, deny, or send back to Planning and Zoning Commission. It's extremely concerning that that process isn't being used, and what instead is happening is items aren't ending up on the council agenda because there's a perception that they will be voted down. That's concerning, and that speaks to you mentioned public meetings. We welcome public discourse about this. The challenge is hasn't been public discourse at a city council level because these items keep getting pushed back. I appreciate this new framework. I think there is a tremendous level of thought in here that we haven't had previously, and I really appreciate the work that staff has put in to be responsive to council members' feedback from that agenda briefing. But to attach things to future milestones that don't exist and kind of park, there's at least 4 residential infill related text amendments that have passed through PZC and not had a hearing at council yet. It seems like we should be using our UDO processes and not kind of an informal straw poll process that is happening outside of public view.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about the process for how things get on council agenda with you offline. Staff can only submit the agenda requests.
Yeah, I would say it seems completely reasonable that the chair of our board would be attached to that council request. Are you familiar with the council request and when they've gone to council?
I have not seen a agenda request item for the 4 residential
that seems,
text amendments.
yeah, it seems completely transparent to ensure that our commission knows that these items, which we are continuing to get broad public support on, are not being seen by council intentionally for some reason. I don't know if that's the mayor makes the decision that it's not interesting to her, if other council members don't want to see these items and they are working through some other channel. That's what I think we're talking about here, is that on a regular basis we see piecemeal change to our zoning map through conditional zoning, which is disequitable. In other words, anyone who has an attorney and would like to change zoning, they have opportunity to come before us, be seen in an expedited way, and go directly to council. The work that staff and ourselves are working on is really about the systemic opportunity for equity, the systemic opportunity for housing. And so if council's only goal is to piecemeal modifications to the zoning map, I'm not sure that that's the way zoning was intended to be used.
And to be clear, I don't know, what council's intention is or why items haven't ended up on their agenda. It just seems to me that we have a clear process outlined in the UDO, and it's confusing, why things are getting pushed back, especially with an uncertain timeline.
Well, it was interesting to me at Hog Creek, there was a public comment that was like a little nugget of gold. And the person stood up and said, it seems like we don't even have zoning in our city anymore because everything is conditional zoning. And that was, I was like, my goodness, that is maybe the truest statement I've heard in a minute. And that's disappointing because what that means is only those who have the ability to hire attorneys are going to have access to our city. And I would disagree with that approach. Now, staying on a more positive note, I would like to say that thresholds, clearly, project level thresholds, clearly is not intended to be in any neighborhood. The primary focus is around small business equity, as well as allowing transit corridors to be utilized for commercial activity. I'll remind everyone that multifamily homes are commercial construction types, and right now they are being measured through single-family home units of dwelling units versus square footage, which is traditional in commercial construction. And that is not a neighborhood, a direct neighborhood impact or connection. The parking amendment that was put forward, abolition of residential parking. The history of that is it started as a concept of a quarter of a mile of literally only bus stops. So that was the initial concept, is somebody can walk a quarter of a mile to a bus stop, and if individuals or developers are developing near that bus stop, there may be unique or diverse opportunities that are presented in our community for those developers being within walking distance. Now, upon a review of our comp plan, the scope of that changed to include transportation corridors. Through broad support from Strong Towns, Asheville for All, Multimodal Transportation Committee, and this board right here, it moved to a citywide removal of parking minimums for residential construction. Now, at the time, and anyone can review these meetings, I kind of said, hey, politically, this may be not very interesting to city council for the very reason that it is in neighborhoods. I think this commission is supportive of removing parking minimums only within a quarter mile. Oh, I will say staff also reiterated that it would be overly cumbersome from a staff labor perspective to regulate just in spotty areas what's required to have parking versus no parking for residential development. So that's how staff got to be in support of the full city removal of parking minimums. So this commission, as far as I can tell, I'll be glad to hear anyone speak up if they don't agree with this, would be supportive of adjustment of parking minimums around bus stops and corridors, or citywide. I think it's well within city council's purview and our approval process for them to see those three options and say, this is what makes sense to our heart in our community at this point in time.
Yeah, I think that procedurally, council makes adjustments to what this body recommends all the time on conditional zonings and other matters. So it doesn't seem problematic. It certainly seems in keeping with the spirit of our recommendation that, you know, what was recommended was a more expansive look. And so anything under that umbrella seems like it would also garner the support. It's certainly my hope that these amendments don't need to come back to us even a third, fourth time for every sort of incremental adjustment when there's been consistent support and affirmation. But procedurally, do you see a challenge with that if council decides to, with the pivot to corridors, that is now our lens to look at UDO amendments, the parking, specifically the parking amendment having to come back to us? Or do you feel that the
It's a good question, and actually that's why we built that time back in. So I know it's disappointing to see that we would be asking you to re-review corridor zoning in October, but you know, upon looking at what was passed and it is possible that we could just send that recommendation up and tell them that in the meantime that there have been some changes. But it would be nice to have a conversation about this. So instead of doing it here during this presentation, that we're doing dedicated, like we're creating an ordinance while we're sitting here, instead of telling the community, hey, we're going to create an ordinance tonight at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So, you know, that is what we're really looking to pivot to, is to say, like, let's have these conversations in an intentional manner. Do I think that there's a procedural problem? I think we could figure out a way to address that issue. I also think that we need to talk about certain things, like there are transit stops in neighborhoods. I live a block away. I live in a residentially zoned area, and I live a block away from a transit stops. And transit stops move, right? So anyone who is a rider knows that. So we just want to make sure that you guys are all solid and that you have a vote and understand the ramifications of it. If, you know, you're not, I'm trying to get a little bit of a temperature from you of how interested you are in having those conversations specifically about corridors, or if you're saying to us, we're just telling you tonight what we're interested in, just make that happen. That's another direction as well.
So what I'd like to reiterate is parking minimums, that's cool and interesting. Nobody up here wants to say that that's not important. I think it's a best practice. We've seen many projects come before us that have requested parking variances, whether that's reduced parking requirements or complete removal of parking requirements, like we saw on Brevard Road with the county's affordable housing project. However, like you said, there are priorities. Project level thresholds, for instance, we all understand that to be a corridor application, okay? And we also have seen City Council and this commission itself get bogged down in, oh my gosh, all of a sudden in September we have 18 meeting agenda items. And then, okay, well, the lowest priority issue gets kicked down the road. And in this case, what we've seen is Haw Creek be noticed to the community multiple times, brought to the Cherokee Center multiple times. You know, council has been very accommodating to specific projects, and then activating the corridor, which is one of the highest zoning modification needs, and that's what project threshold levels is attempting to do at the very lowest level. That is what a surgical UDO amendment looks like. If we don't have the appetite for that, I don't see what having additional mid-month meetings is going to do to enlighten folks, because a public benefits table assumes that a public benefit is missing. Well, I've been homeless in any shelter, period, whatsoever, however, whatever your dwelling unit, whatever that definition is, whether it's a duplex, multifamily, live, work, any of those options are exponentially better than living on the street or living out of your car. And project level thresholds, that is the first step based on everything this board has conveyed, everything this commission has conveyed, and staff supported it. And I think that's the chair's clear request, is that council step up and say, we don't want that, if that's in fact not what they want.
How about this as a proposal to save us, mid-month work sessions? Could we contemplate a motion tonight that would reaffirm the Planning and Zoning Commission's support for the threshold and parking amendments that have been approved previously, with some further, discretion that staff and council could work together on appropriate language adjustments for commercial corridor application?
Chair, could I respond to that just real quickly? What we saw with flag lots and cottage clusters, for instance, is this pairing. And there's a really cool concept of bundling these UDO amendments. This is actually how UFC also got in a little bit of a bind, is that multiple things come across the board, and 70%, 50%, 40%, some percentage folks agree with, and some percentage folks don't agree with. But because they're bundled, because they're married to each other, we throw the baby out with the bathwater, And I, on an individual level, feel that parking minimums are going to do almost nothing to immediately meet the need to provide additional housing supply or housing stock or opportunity for developers. However, thresholds in and of itself actually is that one lever that significantly changes, because we're talking about 22 Thompson Street, for instance, is a level 2 development, which means I think it has 48 units, not 49 units, but the development is 90,000 square feet. That means that the units inside of that building, being level 2, are around 2,000 square feet. That's going to be somewhere around $750,000 condos. That's what that project's going to be. So they're allowed to almost build 100,000 square feet, but only for people who can really afford to buy that 100,000 square feet. If we, once again, anchor to square footage, those units, an apartment in this city is 850 square feet on average. We see our own staff working towards essentially mandating smaller homes. That's what backyard lots did, was mandate small homes on backyard lots. However, we're not even allowing developers or the development community or anyone in our community to pursue smaller multifamily units.
So back to the process question, is there any action we could take tonight that would kind of convey or signal our reaffirmation, even in the event that council provides clear direction that this needs to be limited to commercial corridors?
I guess you could. I don't really know what it almost sounded like you were saying, well, can we get you on board with this process? And if you want to comment that what you've said is, no, we want to move certain things forward, I mean, you've got the right to do that. That's not really.
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure it out, because you guys are picking up stuff that maybe I didn't pick up initially, but I'm trying to come along with the ride. I'm trying to understand where is this getting stuck in the process, right? Why is council not seeing project thresholds? Anecdotally, I agree with Commissioner Wheatley, because anecdotally, I'm getting developers asking me, well, when does this come into council? When are they voting on this? And I don't have an answer, right? Because, I don't know, we've seen it kind of as like a no-brainer. And so I'm just trying to understand.
Right. I just want to revert back to Susan talking about the council agenda briefing. And if you can share what you heard there again.
Yeah, so council was pretty unanimous about only one thing. And it was a wide-ranging conversation. You should watch this agenda briefing again. It was Jeffrey's recommendation, watch it, it was fascinating. The only thing they agreed on was we want to see anti-displacement measures before we will vote on any
Okay.
text amendment to the UDO. That was the only thing that they agreed on. The other stuff was like, anyway. So I would guess that that is why,
They don't, okay, so they're not.
why they're not
interested in
willing
seeing
to
it
look at or put on their agenda or vote on the parking minimums or the thresholds is because the anti-displacement stuff has not come to them for a vote first.
And what, Susan, I think what you're also saying, it's not that the council is not interested in seeing these things. She's just pointing out what their priorities are right now, as far as them being able to move forward as a body, and that is what we take as clear direction.
Well,
So we have refined our process to reflect that they want us to, and this isn't said, but this is what they mean, work with the community more on anti-displacement strategies, bring those, we're bringing them in a more comprehensive and holistic way by pairing regulatory anti-displacement strategies with financing mechanisms, programmatical opportunities moving forwards that will help support it, like home repair, and/or property tax relief, those types of things, tenant protections. So that doesn't mean that, and I want to just underscore this, we're kind of go backwards in the presentation, that does not mean that we won't do anything in residential areas until anti-displacement is fixed. We know that that is a journey, it's not an event. It just means that they want to have a level of assurance. So we are presenting to them on September 10th this comprehensive and holistic strategy. And during that time period, we're working with Legacy Neighborhoods and others to make sure that the first thing that we can bring them is a regulatory way of looking at anti-displacement out of the gate really aligns with what the community thinks they want. And that is because if they do want that and they're supportive of that, and if you all are supportive of it, then council will have a better time, or will be more able to consider it at a meeting.
Okay, so they're tying this project threshold to impacts on anti-displacement.
To be clear, I heard one council member voice that at the agenda briefing. I think I did hear the unanimous, need for anti-displacement around housing-related zoning text amendments, but I only heard one single out thresholds.
I do not think they're tying thresholds to anything. I cannot speak for council, but I just want to tell you that our perception, that it's not about thresholds and that it's not about them not recognizing good policy when they see it. I think that they are very supportive of infill housing. They have said they're very supportive of infill housing along corridors. They just want to see this anti-displacement strategy first. So we are trying to make sure that we can be really clear about what the anti-displacement strategy looks like, talk about how, together as a community about how we can deliver it. Part of it depends on council, part of it depends on our work together.
Would you, upon presenting on September 10th to council, ask them at the end of their discussion about that item if they're now comfortable moving forward with any zoning text amendments? Is that a part of that?
I believe that can be a part of it, and I will absolutely take that into consideration.
yeah, I think it continues to be a contrast, and, it's easy to politic and run. I think there are 2 council people currently running to get re-election this year. And so it's really interesting to hear those folks in particular speak about housing being important, and then seeing good policy along commercial corridors be pushed aside. And also, I would like to say that staff shouldn't be surprised that anti-displacement is this important. Council increased the budget for the middle housing study to include an anti-displacement focus. And we received the presentation on missing middle housing in December of last year, November of last year. And so to be in October, it sounds like this stuff coming before council is, it doesn't feel flexible, adaptable, urgent.
And I'll actually just build on that. I think that the strategy of tying programmatic anti-displacement solutions to policy ones is great. And it's, something that is acknowledged in all the reports as you need both elements. I also think we need to acknowledge as a community that it takes a long time to build a unit of housing and takes less time to roll out resources into a community to repair homes and provide, programmatic solutions. And so any zoning reforms that we take today will not have an impact on our community for 2 years, 3 years, whereas programmatic impacts are immediate. Those get rolled out very quickly.
That's a great point.
And so I think that's a dynamic we need to consider as we pair them. Their timelines might be different, and we might need
That's right.
to really address severe land use challenges in our UDO on an escalated timeline, and not tie it to the availability of funding, because those resources hit the street just a lot quicker than a new housing
Absolutely.
unit.
We will need to do a lot of things whether or not we have funding. And we're, just reiterate, we're excited to do it. Staff is not surprised that displacement is an issue. Staff initiated the additional funding for the anti-displacement study. We worked internally to do that. Although council may have supported, they have supported that. Of course, they're on board with that too. But I appreciate all of the comments here tonight, and let's continue the discussion. I'm going to walk away with a few things. I heard really clearly that there's still a lot of concern about what is keeping these items from being seen at council, and we don't want to stop having that conversation, including potentially in September when staff has this conversation about our overall comprehensive strategy, to check in and say, does this give you the comfort level to be able to pass some things that may not be directly impacting neighborhoods? So that's probably my biggest takeaway, right?
Thank you.
That you want to streamline your processes moving forward for input. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We do public comment on presentations? I know we have a couple members.
You don't have to, it's up to you.
We do have a few members of the public that I know are here because of this matter. So I think in the interest of sort of public discourse, I would like to open public comment on this presentation item at 6:35. Anybody wish to speak?
Hey, I'm Marty Benson. I do a lot of work with Strong Towns. You guys have seen me before. I normally just emote straight from my bleeding heart, but I've got some numbers today that I'd like to share with you. About parking specifically. I'm going to say this now instead of in general comment later, because I'd like to do it in the presence of everyone here. I live at the corner of Indiana Avenue and Michigan in West Asheville. I did some measuring, and from the south end of the BJ's parking lot to State Street is 2,760 feet, making both sides of that road 5,520 feet. If you subtract 30 feet for each of the 5 fire hydrants on that stretch of roadway, and 12 feet for each of the 55 driveways, which are mostly fewer than 12 feet wide, and you count 60 feet for each of the 4.5 intersections that have 2 interruptions there, you're still left with 4,440 feet, which about 20 feet of length for a parking space leaves 222 on-street parking spaces on a stretch of road where there are 75 homes. That's about 3 parking spaces per residence on my street if nobody had any parking. And almost all of us have driveways that can accommodate 3, 4, 6 automobiles. There is a magnificent glut of parking available in West Asheville. I also have a place that's eligible for a backyard lot, and it's zoned RM8. I would love to put some housing back there, and not include parking, because I want to aim and market that housing directly at some of the blue-collar jobs that are on that service industry strip that we call Haywood Road there. So I believe that this would induce some housing in my neighborhood if we pass that. And I'm also on board with Jared in thinking that the level 3 site evaluation is more important than parking. And I just want to emphasize that we've been working really hard on that, on all of this stuff. I've been here for the last several meetings. I will be here for the next few. I've been at the last several city council meetings, and I will be in the next few as well. I just want to get this stuff agendized so we can start making progress in other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Hello, everybody. It's Barry Bialik. I just want to, thank you for your presentation on that. And one thing I will just a few procedural things. It would have been a presentation like that, which is so important. Would have been really nice to have that on the agenda as a document ahead of time, because it's example, public comment is technically due the day before. We have to kind of come to these meetings without, kind of coming blind. And I think I would really like to see some of those items on ahead of time. I think it'd be so helpful. As far as procedure of UDO changes, I'm not sure how it works when y'all initiate them. One thing I am very familiar with is the citizen text ones, so the two that I've got that are on the agenda for September. And I believe procedure is I have to approve if they come off, and I will not. So they will be a litmus test in September because it's on the agenda and I will not agree to them to come off. So we'll at least get a litmus test for that. And yeah, it's I feel your frustration, and I've felt it for years. And we need to be loud to change the process, because it's not fair of all the work we do on our committees and the public puts in, and the hours that you've spent on this and public spends, and then it gets to council with something that's approved, and then it never makes it to their agenda. And if they don't want to be leaders and say yes or no, and just kind of wishy-washy and keep pushing it down the road, we have to be the ones to say, no, you gotta face the music, yes or no. And it's up to us to kind of create those litmus tests. So I'm not gonna back down on my two for September, because we need to know if they want housing or not, and we need to know it before the elections. Because what's happening, and this happens every election year, from committees I run, they keep kicking the can until after elections. So yeah, most of what now has been talked about with the changes that have come through here, I think, or what I'm now hearing is they wouldn't be up until spring for the residential stuff, is the timeline I've heard now. It's not fair. What's happened is housing costs are going up, and it's getting further away, and we need action now. So thank you for your efforts. We'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for opening up public comment. Sharon Summerall, I'm here on the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods. Coalition Asheville Neighborhoods has been around for 32 years. And it, like all organizations, it fluctuates up and down. And 8 years I've been on it, what I've discovered is that every neighborhood has an interest in what's going on in their neighborhood. And everybody is interested in what interests them. And so when we come together and we try to coalesce what we can do as a Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods, the major discussion is development. And what I've discovered from being on the boards and commission and being a reviewer on planning and zoning, on technical review committee, is that things take time. And I do know that when certain UDO changes have come through to the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods, is that it's taken us a long time to deliver information to each individual neighborhoods. People like Barry's had to come to meetings and tell us what's going on, whether we like it or don't like it, doesn't matter. We need to know what's going on. And so when I listen to the process, it takes a long time for us as a community, and hear it in my voice because I'm very vested in this, it takes a long time to deliver information. Hawk Creek took a long time to deliver information, and everybody's got a right to know what their neighborhood looks like. And not everybody's against development, but they want to know what the development looks like. And my neighborhood, which is a legacy neighborhood, we're working on this, is some of us want to have buildings on the property because they're large properties, and others, we do not want massive buildings. So how do we get along with all of us to create what everybody needs, which is housing? And it takes time. And it takes time to give it to the neighborhoods that I have watched in 10 years that are concerned. So I hear everything you're all saying. I'm a contractor, I get it. But the thing is that I have to take a deep breath when I'm listening to everything, and have been to many city council meetings and know it's going to take what it takes, but we've all got to get the information. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing anyone, I'll close the public comment at 6:43. Thanks for coming out and sharing your thoughts. Next up, we have our only public hearing for tonight, a zoning map amendment, request to amend the conditional zoning for property located at 252 Patton Avenue for the purposes of amending the phasing of the project to allow for a temporary open-air substation and the extent of the conditional zoning. The property's pins are identified on the agenda. Property owner is Duke Energy Progress LLC. Applicant contact is Mr. Patrick Coville. And planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commission. Will Palmquist, Planning and Urban Design. I will be presenting this conditional zoning amendment petition for the Patton Avenue proposed substation at 252 Patton Avenue. So this aerial map, you can see the location just on the western side of downtown. The site itself currently consists of 5 properties totaling about 4 acres. You can see it's bounded by Patton, Klingman, Hilliard, Knoxville, and Haywood Street. So the existing zoning for much of the site is CBD conditional zoning. That was a prior approved conditional zoning in 2018 for a enclosed gas insulated substation, so a building that houses a substation within it. The proposed zoning includes amending that conditional zoning for a temporary phase to allow for an open air type traditional substation for a temporary duration. You can see that blue line on the map showing the current zoning line and the new zoning line is that a few of these properties that were single-family houses have been acquired by Duke Energy and are now vacant and cleared and are now being encompassed as part of this zoning. So it's an amendment and also changing a few properties from the RM8 to CBD conditional zone. The future land use is downtown. So here's the kind of illustrative site plan of the temporary phase. So essentially, and some of the background on this I'll mention briefly is that other utility work is needed downtown. There is a proposed new substation at Rankin Avenue behind Harrah's Cherokee Center. Basically, this temporary phase has to be installed first to support that new substation creation, construction, and then once that substation's online, this temporary substation can be dismantled and the previously approved enclosed substation, which serves a different function than an open air substation would, can be built. So that's kind of the background and about as technical as I can get about it. Essentially, this is the layout for the temporary substation. You can see the kind of pad that's already on the site that will house the temporary substation and also the permanent substation. Also being proposed is a recombination of those 5 lots and a subdivision into 3 lots. The 2 lots labeled 3 and 2 on this map are going to be kind of lay down yards for the time being, but essentially once the permanent substation is built, those 2 lots can serve as future development and would just be essentially administered under the CBD zoning district and would not require an amendment to the conditional zoning as long as they met the central business district zoning in the future for whatever is being proposed. Some more detail on the equipment that's being proposed in this temporary phase is a 100-foot tall transmission pole, 70-foot tall lightning mast, and then 40 feet would be the maximum height for the other equipment. There is an 8-foot tall chain link security fence that would be around the perimeter of the site. You can see it in this kind of black line here, and then also around the substation itself. And this site plan is just the previously approved conditional zoning, so it's very similar as far as the location of the proposed substation. It'd be enclosed. It'd be a 1- and 2-story building at about 25 feet in height. A new 12-foot wide sidewalk would be constructed along Haywood Street, and then the existing sidewalks on Patton and Klingman would be preserved. The landscaping that's required, which includes street trees and retaining wall screening, would be installed at the time of the permanent substation construction. So here are those elevations. You know, this was a long process, as a few folks remember, to work with the community to find an aesthetic and a design that served the community in terms of the infrastructure needed, and it was also in character with the prominent gateway of this area. So you can kind of see the north elevation is probably the most, is kind of the main entrance of that substation building, and that is what would be visible from Patton Avenue. So a couple of conditions associated with this project is that the temporary open air substation would be in operation for 3.5 years, at which point that's the proposed limit of the operation before the permanent substation would be built. And then the second condition is a carryover from the first conditional zoning, in that the applicant is proposing to dedicate additional right-of-way to Patton Avenue and Klingman Avenue per NCDOT's approval, since they're NCDOT roadways, and that would allow for future transportation improvements along both of those corridors. There are a number of technical modifications. A lot of these were approved already in the original conditional zoning, and they're just being carried through on this amendment. Most of them relate to the form code design requirements of the CBD district. So things such as having portions of the substation building at 1 story where 2-story minimum is required, fenestration and opening percentages less than the 70% along Klingman and 50% on the other frontages as listed below in those sub-bullets. Building coverage less than 80 feet along the key pedestrian streets. Setbacks of between 80 and 90 feet along Haywood Street, where 0 feet setback is required. And then the last one is, it's kind of tricky to explain. It's basically, there's a height buffer along the southern edge of the site, and essentially it would allow, it restricts the height to being 1.5 times the distance from that transition line, which is the center line of the road. And this condition would allow for encroachment into that by providing a 45-foot tall temporary substation equipment and then a 35-foot tall permanent, I think that got cut off, permanent equipment. So this temporary substation project was approved with conditions at the Technical Review Committee. It was also approved at the Design Review Committee on July 18. There were a couple conditions that the applicant agreed to as part of that proposal, and these have been codified within the project conditions, that the project work with staff to finalize a graphic kind of insert into the temporary fence screening. So the perimeter fence that would surround the site during the temporary stage of the project, and then also that during the construction of the permanent substation, could have graphical inserts that could relate to different aspects of either the project or the community or Asheville in general, instead of just the typical kind of black slats that can be inserted. And also that the DRC suggested a consideration of a second privacy fence along Knoxville Place in Hilliard at the south side of the property. There's a portion of the proposed site plan where the fence kind of jogs in a lot, and the DRC recommended they might want to move that fence, add a second fence further down to keep folks from that area in general. So the overall project is consistent with the proposed future land use of downtown, which speaks to the future of Asheville as far as a sustainable and resilient place to live, work, and relax, which includes further enhancement of traditional and green infrastructure to be prioritized and support a sound urban design and placemaking principle. Project also supports a couple of goals in the comprehensive plan, including to encourage responsible growth by ensuring that new development has the appropriate infrastructure to support it, and to make streets more walkable, comfortable, and connected by eliminating gaps in the citywide sidewalk network. Therefore, staff is recommending approval of the proposed conditional zoning amendment with the attached Exhibit E conditions. We also have the project team and designers with us this evening, and they're prepared to answer any questions you may have as well.
Any questions for staff?
Were all the conditions agreed to that you had mentioned in the other two reviews?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of the conditions on the TRC ones are technical in nature, so they don't really have a choice, but the ones for the DRC do, yes.
I had a question, just kind of clarifying. The underlying zoning is now CBD, is that correct?
For these two properties on the former conditional zoning, it's CBD conditional zone. So CBD with the caveat of those previously adopted site plans and conditions.
So if the temporary substation doesn't go in and the previous conditional zoning, I believe, is already expired, is that correct?
Technically, yes.
Okay, so it's expired.
Yeah, and
it's like milk in the fridge. You can drink it if you feel ambitious.
I mean, technically, it has not been rezoned back to anything else, so it's technically the zoning is CBD conditional zone. I can let Janice speak to some of the caveats around that, but it's still technically zoned CBD conditional zone, and it has not been rezoned back to CBD underlying districts.
Because I don't know if CBD made it here. I don't know what the previous map looked like, if it was CBD and then went to CBD CZ. I don't think it did, to be honest, in this area.
I think it was CB1 perhaps. It used to be that car dealership, right? And
I don't think it was CBD prior to the CZ.
Right.
And part of why I ask is because a couple months back we did CZ for the loading dock down in Arden.
Right.
Because it had lost its previous, or it wasn't meeting the previous CZ, which still wasn't vested anyway.
Right.
And so just not knowing the path this project's going to take, and I just, because the next part of this is, how do we know that this is going to be a temporary, what are the mechanisms in place legally to ensure that this is a temporary substation versus our new permanent substation that doesn't have any of the community engagement that happened for the permanent substation?
Sure. It would basically just be any other zoning violation in that regard. So if they were operating past 3.5 years after the construction of the temporary substation, they would technically be in violation of zoning, just like if someone started whatever selling merchandise out of their house or whatever, you know. So we could issue a notice violation. I'm sure we would work with them and talk to them ahead of time. They could always come back and ask for more time, amend the project conditions. I couldn't imagine it coming to that, but we could issue a notice violation, and we could pursue any other legal discourse like any other zoning violation, and that would be the main mechanism that the city could have. I know Duke Energy's been a community partner and a willing participant in this process since before 2018. So. Yeah, I can't imagine a scenario like that, but the city does have enforcement tools at its disposal to use in case of that scenario.
Yeah, okay.
Hear from the applicant.
Yeah, let's hear from the applicant.
Sure.
I don't actually have anything else to share.
Okay.
I'm Justin Brown. I'm the project manager with Duke Energy for this one. To address your first question, we did put, we offered a 6-month timeline in the, which document was that specifically? Okay, in the application. So basically, when the Vanderbilt substation, which is on Rankin Avenue, is rebuilt, we are committing to having the temporary station removed within 6 months. And also, we are still currently working on the GIS project, so we're updating the bid package for that. We're planning to award that in early 2025, and that's going to come with a significant upfront down payment. So that'll be a pretty strong commitment to having the GIS station built. Additionally, the Vanderbilt station is likely to be under construction until mid-2026. So we would have the temporary station removed, hopefully by the end of 2026, and then we could roll into the permanent GIS station construction in 2027, with hopes to have it complete by 2028, by the end of 2028.
Thank you. That's actually a really helpful timeline, and it makes me wonder if we'd need the 5-year validity period. You know, it sounds like this is all happening pretty quickly. So condition number 28.
Well, the 5 years we discussed in the pre-meeting will actually cover the whole CZ, which includes this temporary and then the permanent. But Will just said that this, what you were mentioning, that you said is in the application, that you will dismantle the temporary within 6 months of the new one, the new one being operational, and that the temporary will only operate for 3.5 years may not be in the conditions, and it sounds like those would be important conditions.
The 3.5 years one is, but not the 6 months. So it says that the temporary substation would operate for a maximum of 3.5 years after its construction.
Right. I mean, I'm just curious if we could put in there, you know, or 6 months after the Rankin Street is complete, whichever is sooner.
Whichever is sooner,
Yeah.
yeah. Is that something the applicant would be willing, I don't know if you have others from your team that would have to agree to that.
It sounds like it
As a
would be.
condition.
It sounds like it would be reasonable to us. That's what we've been proposing up at this point.
Okay.
So I don't want to overstep, but
Okay, but then the total 5 years is getting going and getting vested on just starting the project.
Right, so, I mean-
So you're saying it might not even need to be 5 years, you can do 3.
Yeah, because pulling the permit on the temporary would
that-
satisfy that 5, so, I mean, is that something that's important to you all to have a 5-year runway before you need to pull a building permit? It sounds like you're mobilized for, 2026.
yeah, unless something goes significantly wrong, or if there's a massive or another pandemic, I don't see why we would need to extend that 5 years. That's why the substation or the gas insulated substation got put on hold in the first place. Because when COVID hit, we just didn't know what the conditions were going to be. We weren't sure if load was going to continue to grow in the area, so we weren't sure if that additional substation would be needed. But at this point, I don't see why we would be concerned about the 5-year time limit.
If you all are agreeable to go to 3 years, it seems like that might provide some assurance to the community that this site, which has, kind of been in the hopper for a while, is gonna see some movement soon.
I think that's acceptable, and that would basically be like shovel in the ground for the gas insulated substations. when that-
We didn't talk a lot about it, but the last condition in that document basically says that there's a time frame between city council approval and when a project takes action to obtain building permits, and basically allow, if a project stalls out and doesn't even apply for building permits, the city can rezone that property back to a base zoning district. So currently it says the project has 5 years between city council approval and taking action to obtain building permits, and the commission is requesting to reduce that to 3 years. So if this is approved at the end of August, then you'd have 3 years from that date to apply for building permits for the temporary substation.
In that case, that 3 years is definitely doable, because we should be submitting for permits in 2026, I imagine.
For, you talking submitting permits for the temporary?
For the permanent
Okay,
gas
'cause-
insulated building.
And this is
It would be
kind of,
upon your first permit
Yeah.
would make, what the temporary would be the first
yeah.
thing they're building.
So, and that's where I just want to make sure I'm kind of tracking the two separate conversations. One conversation is vesting required for permitting of this CZ, which would be the temporary substation.
This CZ has both in it. This CZ incorporated the last one that approved
Okay.
the permanent.
Not two different
And it's added the temporary. Right?
I don't,
I think I see where you're going. You're wanting to make sure that the permanent station is
Yeah, I don't-
separate, or that timeline is separate but stated.
So I think
From the temporary.
adding that 6 month or 3.5 years, whichever is sooner, in addition to reducing the time to get the first building permit to 3 years, kind of accomplishes both, you know, gets them moving, and it gives assurance that the permanent will happen in short order, as I understand it.
So we've got Exhibit E, we've got within 6 months of the Vanderbilt online, right? And we've got temporary for 3 years after construction.
3.5. Yep,
Is that right?
3.5 years.
That's
For 3.5?
For the total at the very last
Oh,
condition, instead of
Yeah.
a 5-year period of 3 years.
3 years following council approval till they apply.
Oh,
for the
To
council.
get
building
building
permit.
permits. Initial building permits.
It's condition number 28. Shall we, any other questions, comments from commissioners?
you don't have any presentation, you're just taking questions?
I don't have too much extra information. We have a few additional renderings. If you'd like, I can plug in and show those. And I did just want to show why this is needed in the first place. When we were originally working on this project, we were planning to build across the street from Rankin Avenue, and there was public feedback, but that they really didn't like the loss of the canopy in the area. So originally that was going to be, we were going to rebuild over here, but this photo down here shows that the new station is overlapping with the old one, so we need to remove, completely decommission the old station before we can start working on the new one. So that's the entire reason that the temporary substation is needed. And then let me zoom back out here.
Didn't you remember that was like a big deal?
So I'll just quickly go, here's a rendering from a few different vantage points. This one is down on Knoxville Place, just showing kind of visually what to expect. Here we've got one from Klingman. This is about midway down where our driveway, permanent driveway will be. Another from higher up on Klingman, so you can kind of see at the higher elevations, it's not going to have too much of a visual impact except for a few of the taller structures being seen over the privacy fence. Up on West Haywood Street, it's a little harder to hide it just because you are at a higher elevation there and closer to the substation. And then this is right at our access drive. So we are planning to have a little cutout basically to get the trucks off of Klingman as quickly as possible. We heard a lot of feedback from the Weekend neighborhood that traffic is a major issue, so we want to make sure we can get our people off the road as quickly as possible there. That's about it. A few more renderings of the permanent station, but I think Will already shared those. So that's all I have. Any other questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Anything else, or should we open for public comment?
Yes.
All right, at 7:06, we'll open for public comment. And seeing none, we'll close for public comment at 7:07.
I've got a couple more questions. On the West Haywood Street sidewalk, what is it looks like there's a gap in that sidewalk between West Haywood Street and the existing sidewalk that's essentially at Patton Avenue?
I believe that is not our property. We have a transmission line right away in that area, but I can't remember off the top of my head whose property that is. I don't know if it's DOT or Asheville's.
Well, I'm going to look it up and see, because it'd be awesome if that sidewalk showed up. In the Downtown Design Review Commission, they noted something aesthetic on the screening, or how did you interpret that?
We had a few discussions about what they would like to see, and we're also going to work with our corporate communication folks to develop something and share that with staff to get their final approval. It would be probably solid color for the majority of the area, and then a smaller section with renderings of the future station. They were, I think they pointed out they don't want a bunch of advertising. Essentially, they don't want a ton of company names or anything like that. And since it's going to be up for quite a while, we want to make sure it's visually appealing or blends in. We're not trying to make it stand out. Unfortunately, we don't have anything to share right now.
And stop me if I'm out in left field, but I would like to see that be engaged as public art. I mean, it's going to be up in the public space for 18 months at least, 8 feet tall. I don't know, maybe that young man with his ruler who talked about how many linear feet that is a road could help me here, but that's got to be the better part of a half mile of fence screening. And, you know, Joe Schmo Construction Company would have their logo every 8 feet on it, but I think to be good community members, I would not prefer to have 8 foot of, you know, a random color there. Is that something you feel like your team would accommodate?
We could be open to it. I don't know logistically how we would accomplish that. If it would be us purchasing someone's art to put there, or if it'd be
I would bet it's substantially less work than the temporary substation.
Are you proposing a condition? Or?
Yeah, exactly. I'm proposing a condition for some level of public art on the screening of that entire fence along public roads.
Is there any commitment from the applicant that you're willing to make tonight, or is that just?
I think we can definitely investigate it. The design review board did mention that, and then it ended up.
Well, here's what I know. Public art often takes the form of geometric shapes, a repeating pattern. Anything of interest is better than nothing there, and I don't think it's a large ask.
I think we can certainly look into it. I don't know if we can fully commit to it. We'll have to work with our other city staff liaison to determine how to implement that.
I'd just like to be clear. Jackson Pollock is art. That's just paint splashed around. So I'm not setting a high bar here for what art is. I'll leave that to people, I mean, who are more sophisticated than I am.
I think what you're saying is it could be as simple as, all right, so you have the black slats. The slats go between the chain link, right? I mean, you could have multiple colors of slats. They can run diagonal, they can run vertical, right? You know, it's not like you don't have to print necessarily artwork.
Yeah.
It could just be something of interest, repetition, color.
I think we can look into it. I'm hesitant to completely commit to it, but we're certainly open to talking with staff about that.
From design review, was it all areas of the fence or just specifically along the West Haywood? You know, because it's pretty remote, you know, it's sort of tucked back pretty far from Klingman and Patton, so it's.
Oh, that's permanent. We're talking about the temporary.
Yeah, this would be for the full perimeter of the property, essentially.
Yeah. Gotcha, okay.
They mentioned basically having the color all around, but then only having some type of graphic on smaller sections, so it don't cover the entire perimeter with graphics.
Hi, as the planning and urban design director, who is at least if in this very moment, who was mentioned in the conditions. So I want to say that it's pretty broad. You guys are all looking at the condition, right?
Number 9.
Right. So we're just having a conversation. Are you saying that you want more specificity, that the planning and urban design director's approval of the graphic screening inserts and the extent, the location, extent, and configuration of the graphic portion you want more specificity on that? Because,
Or do you want to just success that?
Correct, correct. I would like it to actually
Or
be,
consider public art?
and yeah, I want to actually say public art.
Instead
Like,
of graphic insert.
yes, I do not want to see 3 years of,
Branding.
yeah, exactly. Like, in other words, this is only a semi-temporary, temporary installation. This is going to be up as essentially, you know, I mean, they've got 2 laydown yards there. I mean, it's essentially a 2-3 year construction site.
So who's the who that does that? I mean, what are you
I
suggesting?
mean, what I'm suggesting
Yeah.
is that Duke has the ability to engage the public in some way, present options for what they can afford. I mean, I'm not here to set the threshold for art, but what I am here to say is that we can do something more interesting than a graphic slat, than black slats, than restricting their branding. I think there should be no branding. I don't want to see future graphics of what a permanent building is going to look like someday, theoretically there. That's not interesting to me.
and can
I-
you
I
just
don't think the
clarify what
public's
your, if there's there any level of specificity as the applicant today that you'd be willing to commit to? Whether like that would be that Duke would work with City of Asheville staff to explore a public art process? Something that doesn't, yeah, if you could speak to that, would that be helpful for us?
Good evening, Remington Jackson, Parker Poe, Adams, and Bernstein. Good to see you all again. First time meeting you. I was here the last meeting for a special use permit for Duke Energy. Just want to step in for 1 second. I did notice in the design review committee hadn't mentioned this prior. They had a preference for a printed graphical screen inserts that consist of Duke logos, public art, or neighborhood-related branding and design instead of proposed slates. This is something that had been part of the conversation, so we are open to that. The problem with this is that we didn't get specificity from the design review committee, so we weren't able to actually say we'll go forward with that. If that's something the design committee is willing to give us information on, we're willing to move forward with that information. But it's hard for us, for Duke to say, yes, we'll move forward with this without having specificity from the design review committee that would be making this decision.
So I'm being specific. They listed public art. I'm saying I would like the condition to be public art.
If that's something the design review committee is willing to do, then yes.
They follow us, so that's, if they listed
I
it,
think he's saying they would benefit from some more specific direction, other than just, you're saying it has to be public art, and they're saying there would be a process to how do you get the art, what do you do, and all that, and maybe the design review committee could assist in that.
Or our public art and cultural
Or the
commission?
city. or the public
yeah,
art.
that's what I was
where
like,
I'd put it.
yeah.
We're good. I think if Duke would be willing to explore that opportunity, and there's just a little bit more specificity in what you read than what's in the condition, would you be willing to alter the condition for it to say what you just read?
I think we're open to that, yes.
I'd also ask about timeline, though, if that's going to take, 4, 5, 6 months to implement, would some type of other privacy screening be acceptable in the meantime?
It's so interesting, that people have all unlimited resources for these things until it comes for an ask back from the public. And I don't think it's too much to ask at all for an investment this size in this location to commit to public art.
Yeah, we're open to that. I'm just, if it takes us 6 months to determine what art's going to be acceptable before we can have it printed and installed.
Well, I was willing to accept whatever art you were willing to produce, and you've asked to go.
It's only a mutually agreed upon condition, so you can tell us what you can agree to tonight. If you need that condition, it goes on to city council. City council decides what the final condition will be, but it sounds like they're more comfortable saying they're going to explore it or do their best or work with staff. Are you not open to, you're kind of, I think, saying you want it, it's going to be public art and without a process. So just trying to find a middle ground which you mutually agree upon or they don't agree to it at all.
I guess I'm confused. Why do I need to define the process for how they get to public art?
Because it's a big, well, we want public art, but there's, the devil's in the details,
Yeah,
let's just say. As
who
you
and
said,
the
the
what?
timing might come into play. So it sounds like there could be some, the language you read.
Is
that
working with
included-
the city, is that timeline, is that, are you talking about, like, is that would be 6 months, or is that something that could happen quicker than that?
It's an administrative approval, and we would involve, I would say, we would involve the Public Art and Cultural Commission to help inform the project. It's an administrative approval. We could absolutely do it in this timeframe.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So can you,
Oh, so
so
for,
maybe still some language that.
okay,
you've heard
so
that
if you
we
could, yes,
revoke.
sir, if you would please restate what you heard from the Design Review Committee.
Sure. So within the design review committee, their preference was a preference for a printed graphical screen inserts that could consist of Duke logos, I'm assuming, yeah, Duke logos, public art, or neighborhood-related branding and design instead of proposed slates. I think that's something that Duke would be amenable to moving forward with. We would
Cut
just
that
need more
language.
specificity as to which one of those options, and if public art is the option that's selected, what does that consist of, and what does the staff actually want us to put there?
So the new condition would, regarding those graphic inserts, it would also include with a preference for printed graphical fence inserts that consist of Duke logos, public art, or neighborhood-related branding and design instead of slats.
Yeah, I mean,
And then we would still basically have that it would need to be reviewed and approved by the planning director.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand the need for a Duke logo on there
Yeah, I'll
because there's a 100-foot pole. So I'm pretty sure that's a big enough advertisement for Duke.
if
you
we
know?
just drop the Duke logo, I'm good with it.
Would you be amenable to dropping the reference to the Duke logo at this time?
I mean,
Clarification, I agree from a Duke logo perspective, from a branding.
Sorry, could you
Up
come
to
up
the
to the
mic
mic?
and
Yeah.
state your name.
I'm just wondering about, like Duke name and stuff, and so clarification on some signage as into entry gates and things like that, as opposed to, which is not necessarily screening, but but being really specific about when we talk about, trespassing signage or construction
Sure.
site signage in a regulatory nature, name and logo becomes, I think, important in that realm of conversation. So I think it's just kind of clarification. And I'm sorry, I'm Jennifer Bennett. I'm the government and community relations manager for Duke in this territory. But I think that's what I wanted to point out.
yeah, I mean, we'll certainly have signs with our logo, but to your point, yes, not 5-foot wide printed Duke Energy logos.
And it's not part of the screening.
Wouldn't
That's
be part of the
separate. That's the
screening,
regular
yeah.
signage of
Right.
the project.
I mean, operating in good faith takes good faith, and the amount of attempt to clarify what good faith is makes me feel like there's not a lot of good faith, if that makes sense. So I guess, what I would say is, no one said you can't have entrances, no one said you can't have caution, no one said you can't have construction zone signs, but we're talking about an 8-foot fence that literally is going to...
Screening.
Yeah, it's a huge parcel, so... All right.
Did want to ask a point of clarification prior. There was a discussion about 3.5 years for the one condition versus 5 years for the vesting condition. The vesting condition, does that apply to the permanent, or does that apply to the temporary?
It would invest the entire condition.
Entire
When you
project.
pull your first building permit, which would be for the temporary, that stops that 5-year limit clock.
So you have
So they reduced it to 3 years because you're going to pull your permit. Your
Within that
initial
3 years?
permit for the overall CZ includes both the temporary and the permanent.
Okay.
They're not bifurcated.
Yes, so just taking it through in my head, if permits are pulled say in 2 months or something,
Within 3 years.
within 3 years, so the project still has the 3.5 years to
Yes.
complete? Okay, that's why I
Oh,
wanted to
yes.
be sure.
Yeah, essentially, 6.5 years.
We just didn't want to overrun in terms of if you have
Right.
3 years versus 3.5, and then the
Yeah.
project's still
Yes.
going. Okay.
Yes. We don't usually set a time limit on how long, once it's started, how long it will take to build it. But in this case, it's were just trying to emphasize the temporary nature. So that was that condition, that was 3.5 years or within 6 months of the operation of the other, the new substation, whichever is less.
Gotcha. For the one condition, and then
For
3
the-
years.
For the temporary station being in existence.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I do have one last legal question, since we've gone through this tortured exercise around fence screening. There was some, back and forth on construction fence screening several years ago in relation to the city's signage ordinance, and it was preempted by some state law that basically allowed wind screening on construction sites. Does anybody remember this?
I do remember it.
I guess what I'm, sorry.
It
Well,
has to comply with, so we can't.
I'm just curious if we can put conditions about the content of screening, because I know when that happened, basically, the city was disallowed from preventing construction site screening that had logos, branding of any construction company, even though it was, I think the city was trying to use the sign ordinance to do that, and they were disallowed from doing that.
Yeah.
But in conditions, we're allowed to make conditions about content
I
of
guess somebody could
screening.
say it's a mutually agreed upon condition. I guess they wanted to come back and say that violates, the constitutional First Amendment rights to not put something there. But I think we're talking about fencing and screening, and that's why I wanted to stay away from, that doesn't preclude them from having their normal signage that you would have on a construction project, right? We're talking about a certain area that is visible,
Mhm.
and we're saying
And aesthetic.
that's screening material, sort of like saying the fence material. But you're right, that has come up, the signs that are.
I just wanted to make sure, I just wanted to make sure it had teeth before we go to the effort,
You probably know where he's
You know.
going with that, but,
I think
but
it's
it is a-
aesthetics to
it's-
screen. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds
that's
good.
screening.
Craft.
Are we?
So on condition number 15, it states the new sidewalk along West Haywood Street will be a minimum of 12 feet wide. And I pulled up GIS, and though there's certainly some level of easement there along what was intended to be a road, I guess, tying into Patton Avenue at some point, it's clear that the conditions anticipate a sidewalk being on your property. Is that correct? Item 15, condition 15?
As opposed to the right-of-way, is what he's
Sidewalks
saying.
proposed along Haywood Street would connect to the existing one that connects to Patton Avenue, correct?
Correct.
That's what's proposed.
I mean, it's included in the conditional zoning,
Mhm.
condition 15.
I think it's shown on the site plan that way too, that maybe there's some confusion about the geography that was asked about before, but the site plan shows the sidewalk between Knoxville Place and along the property of Haywood Street, and then tying into where that existing sidewalk is that does connect to Patton Avenue. So that's,
Well, item 15 requires a sidewalk. I don't know what site plan folks are looking at.
It's there.
This is the permanent site plans. This is the original one from the previous conditional zoning. So at the time of when they do the permanent substation, they'll have to comply with this site plan. And you can kind of see that sidewalk along Haywood Street. You can see the tree grates in there.
The running bond pattern.
Yes, let's go. I guess the only point I'm trying to make is we'd like that sidewalk included in the temporary CZ, not just in the permanent long-term plan. In other words, can we include in the conditions to include that in the initial construction of the site?
Looks like there might be
When you go to build a
grading.
permanent, when you, I mean, it might impact their ability to construct construct the permanent? I don't know, I'm not looking at the plan, you know. So are you precluded from doing that permanent sidewalk at this initial stage? Is that what you're saying, you'd like it sooner
Yeah.
rather than waiting?
Correct. I see
permanent
people
one
walk
goes
on
in?
it literally every day, walking on that grass.
I don't know. But
I don't believe it is. I feel like that is something. We just need to, I guess, look at the time frame of when we need to install that.
is there something about access to a temporary station where you have to have more, you want less access? When something's contained within, maybe you don't mind having a public sidewalk going by, but.
No, I
don't
think,
know.
no, there's no concern for that. I think we had just left it in the permanent site plan along with all the permanent landscaping and everything else.
Do you know if the transmission poles that are along Haywood Street are being relocated in the permanent phase? They look to kind of be in the path of the sidewalk or?
I don't believe they are. I think we're adding 2 additional structures to bring the transmission line into the station, but I don't think those existing structures, they potentially could need to be relocated in the future, but I would not expect them to be.
I'm just wondering, so I'm looking on Street View, and it looks like the existing sidewalk where it ends, if you kept walking on it, you would walk literally into one of those big transmission poles. So is that a consideration that?
It's shown in their site plan, like right in the middle of the sidewalk.
Right. That's a consideration. Maybe it's in the middle of the sidewalk.
Well, it's in line with the street trees, so, you know, just.
It's part of the aesthetic.
But to go back
Part of
to
the sidewalk.
Commissioner Wheatley's point, it does strike me that could be agreed upon at the time of temporary, you know, just go ahead and make the permanent improvement to the sidewalks. Is that a condition that, or a commitment that Duke is willing to make?
I feel like we could,
The street trees then too.
Yeah, sidewalk and street trees.
I mean, there's no reason to not make the improvement to the community.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll vote against this thing. I don't think we should. I'll vote against it.
I think we're going to make that. I think we're going to install that.
We can't install the sidewalk. I can't do it. You ever call their customer service line? They treat you just like this.
You guys were busy. I didn't want to interrupt. The reason for that 12-foot potentially being there or not being there has to do with the phasing of the construction. So what was just told to me is that if we build the 12-foot and then when we add the permanent substation in, we have to tear down the 12-foot to rebuild it again, is where the question is. We don't have our construction person here to tell us that one way or the other. So that's why I don't think it's in the actual conditions right now.
Why I would disagree is your access is off of Klingman. And so what you would be telling me right now through this logic is that you're going to bring all your construction trucks through West Haywood Street.
No, so one thing that
Because
is,
West Haywood Street doesn't connect to Patton. So you're going to drive around your entire site.
no, but there is a distribution line that is in West Haywood that we will have to connect to. So we will have to dig up from the station or from the existing pad to West Haywood. So we could do the sidewalk, but it would have to be after the distribution connection is made.
So what you're talking about is trenching a small area of what is shown on the site plan as like a very large
That's correct.
expansive
I think
sidewalk.
that would be the extent. I don't know if there's any other, if the transmission structures do need to be relocated for the permanent GIS station, then that could cause another conflict. I think it's something we can look into. I'm hesitant to guarantee it at this time.
That seems like a very reasonable request, that if it's just about connecting a transmission line that maybe impacts a 5-foot swath of sidewalk, getting that sidewalk in for the public benefit as soon as possible seems like a reasonable request. And street trees, you know, kind of the final finished product there. But you're saying that's not something you can commit to here?
I would like to make sure there's no other conflicts that might exist.
Maybe there's an amendment to the conditions such as as soon as possible or upon phasing a project, temporary versus permanent, something that, since we don't have the information at this very moment, one way or the other, if this will cause an issue, so that we don't commit to putting a 12-foot sidewalk there and then having to tear it back up because of another issue.
I mean, I'd just like to be clear. You're acting as though you'd have to tear up an entire sidewalk,
No.
which is not anywhere near what's being requested.
No, I'm acting as if I don't know. I don't have the information at this time, so I don't want to make the condition, because this is a conditional rezoning, and
Okay.
say we're going to put a 12-foot sidewalk if we're not able to.
How much of the sidewalk would you anticipate if you, I mean, you're talking about the transmission line, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how much of that, how many linear feet of sidewalk would you have to pull up?
I wouldn't expect a huge amount. I mean, maybe 10 or 12 feet if a transmission structure has to be relocated,
So 144 square feet of sidewalk.
potentially.
You know, and as we've learned recently, the running bond sidewalk pattern is notoriously difficult on trenching, patching, replacing because of the nature of the pattern. I know we're kind of going down bunny trails here, but I personally would be willing to relieve them of the requirement to do running bond in exchange for a commitment to early installation of the sidewalk and street trees.
I 100% agree with that.
But I don't know that we're hearing that they're willing or able to make that commitment. What I personally, I can't speak for the rest of the commission, but I personally would be comfortable with a condition for exploration of this notion between now and the time of council approval. But of course, I can't speak for anyone else on that. I think I heard kind of an earnest exploration would be acceptable.
And that's,
And as soon as possible, as long as they don't discover there's a conflict in the phasing of the construction.
Right.
So it elevates, I mean, it expedites it. There's a sort of a condition that's expedited as soon as they find that they can't do it.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting to the permanent.
And I think it would allow us to memorialize in the conditions the importance of that element to the public, of the totality of the project.
So I'd like to be clear, though, to the commission. I see housing developers being more flexible than our public utility on providing public good right now. That's what I've seen in the last year, is I see an uncompromising approach right now from somebody who's supposedly a community partner.
So I think they don't have all the facts, though. I think you're misreading
Well, they can
that.
continue. There's no time pressure. You're not even releasing this project until next year to be bid, correct? Your project downtown. So there's no time sensitivity to this project. So they can explore and come back.
For the temporary substation, there is a time constraint. We would like to install that quite soon.
Well, we've contemplated several revisions to the conditions. I might summarize where we're at right now. We've contemplated revising condition 5. The temporary substation shall not operate longer than 3.5 years, to include the addition of 6 months following the Rankin substation becoming online, whichever is sooner. We've contemplated amending condition, I'll start at 9, around the screening, to more explicitly express a desire for public art, and following the language that our planning director recited into the microphone earlier. We've had we're talking about condition 15 being amended to include some language that would include a commitment by Duke to explore any conflicts that could prevent the sidewalk from being installed along with the temporary substation and sidewalk and street trees, with a possible contemplation that that sidewalk could be relieved of the running bond requirement in exchange for early installation with patch and repair after lines are buried.
I might not include the running bond portion because it's technically an SSDM requirement and not zoning. I think city staff could waive that, so I wouldn't really phrase it as like a
Okay.
thing like that, but maybe just saying with the recommendation that they could use standard scoring patterns, given they might have to replace sections of it. So yeah, similar.
Sounds good. And then finally, condition 28, the validity period being shortened to 3 years from the date of approval by city council.
On 15, you mentioned both having them explore it and then also the caveat of them being able to replace it. So, I mean, I feel like there's two options here. One, they explore if it's feasible without replacement and then do it as soon as possible. Or two, they just go ahead and do it and then replace the sections as necessary. Yeah, patch.
I guess what I was hearing is, we know certain areas that the lines are going to conflict and would require a patch. There may be some unknowns that they're going to have to talk with their construction team about that aren't readily apparent based on their plans that could preclude the whole thing. I think it's our desire that that sidewalk get installed along with the temporary, but what I was hearing was only a commitment to explore because there may be some unknown information today that their construction team would provide them feedback on that wouldn't make it feasible.
Would it help to add something in terms of explore before the city council meeting where the next vote will be so that we can confirm one way or the other? Would that give more comfort?
I think so.
Explore for the purposes of installing, yeah, I think in the language should say explore for the purpose of installing with the temporary substation. That way,
I like that,
when
yeah.
council sees the condition, they understand, and by the time you get to them, you'll have an answer and they'll see the condition.
The condition could be updated in the meantime to say if Duke doesn't have an issue with the sidewalk, that it could be changed explicitly to say construct the sidewalk with the temporary phase, and then we'll relay that planning and zoning recommended approval with those conditions, and Duke has in fact agreed to it, or say Duke has said they're not able to. Planning and zoning said they wanted them to explore it. Duke said they're not able to. This is where we are tonight. So it could be a living condition, and then give them some time to think about it.
Got all that?
I think so.
Yeah, I think
how do
we'll
we
need
move
help with the
forward?
motion.
Is anybody willing to make a motion with those adjustments noted?
I'm definitely,
It's like Byron's working on it.
yeah, I was going to say, I don't know exactly how to word it, but
I think you can just say with the
Just say those
previously
conditions we
mentioned.
just discussed.
yeah. I move to recommend approval of the Patton Avenue temporary substation project as presented based on the site plans, elevation, and materials submitted and discussed, heard during the review, and find that the project meets the intent of the downtown design guidelines subject to
The
Exhibit E and everything else that we just covered.
Recommendation from the staff, the P&Z staff report about the comprehensive plan consistency. Are you reading the wrong motion, Byron?
God, I hope not.
That sounds like a DRC motion, and
Oh,
Maybe
maybe.
worried
It
that
was
I
in
may-
the staff report.
okay,
It is the DRC report.
okay,
Yeah, sorry.
no worries. Gotta have all that fancy consistency language, or else it's not legit. So.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that while I'm looking for it? I think my mentor here helped me. All right, I move to approve the conditional zoning amendment requested for the property located at 252 Patton Avenue from residential multifamily medium density RM-8 and central business conditional zoning CBD-CZ to central business conditional zoning CBD-CZ for the purpose of amending the phasing of the project and the extent of the conditional zoning, and find that the request is reasonable and is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community, in that the request ensures that the new development has the appropriate infrastructure to support it, eliminates gaps in the citywide sidewalk network,
And that's with the conditions as discussed.
with the conditions as discussed.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, so the motion passes 4-1. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
So we did amend the agenda to add a discussion about our membership composition. Do you all need a quick break before we do that? I don't want to hold you hostage longer than we need to. I'm good plowing through if you all are.
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm fine, as long as
All
it
right,
doesn't take
let's
too
keep
long.
going on. So we have technically 3 seats coming open on the Planning and Zoning Commission. One is mine, and I have signaled a desire to stay on if council will reappoint me. One is Susan's, and Susan will be rotating off.
Correct.
So Susan's seat will be filled, and then we have a vacant seat. So we have just received several applicants for the Planning and Zoning Commission. It seemed like an opportune time to just solicit feedback on what our composition is, will be post Susan, and what's sort of what's missing from being represented on our board. So I'll just kind of open it for discussion.
Yeah, and one thing we talked about earlier was wanting our commission to be representative of the community to the best degree possible. So encouraging, diversity of race and age and gender and all those kinds of demographics is desired. It's not always possible, but I would love for council, and to whatever degree the commission has influence, to seek that out.
And what skill sets are we looking for to fill? Have we thought about that?
Well, I guess starting with what we have is we have a construction professional, estimator, landscape architect, real estate professional, and an architect / affordable housing developer. To me, we don't have, and it may be difficult to achieve, losing Susan, we won't have somebody from a kind of land use advocacy perspective. I feel like that could be beneficial.
Yeah, I'll speak more directly to the diversity that Susan gave a head nod to, which is that, being representative of our community means having women on this board, and providing that lens is important to all of us, I think, to providing balance. Additionally, we've discussed a lot around anti-displacement. Anti-displacement to me also is really discussing ethnocide and the removal of separate culture in our community, and communities feeling safe and secure in their diversity and their ways of being. And right now, as an Indigenous person, I tried to bring some of that, but my indigeneity is not reflective of Black Americans, of Hispanic culture, or Eastern European. And I think that's a really important component that our board's kind of lacking right now. And there's a technical competency that's required in this board that hopefully applicants have taken time to anticipate that kind of coming up to speed, and hopefully staff is also working towards a training program to help familiarize more diverse board members with UDO and with the way staff reports are presented, and different training opportunities with the North Carolina School of Government. So I think that's what feels important to us right now, is not just professional diversity, but true, diversity that represents our community.
Yeah, I think that speaks to our credibility. We want to speak as a board with the credibility that we're reflective of the community and diverse voices, and not kind of a isolated segment of society. So I totally agree. I think focusing on diversity, not just in the composition of our board, but then also what equitable strategies will allow fuller participation from underrepresented groups. I hear you on that. So I guess back to Byron, you asked what skill sets are missing. Anyone else have thoughts about backgrounds or
I think we talk a lot about having kind of a holistic view, and so that lends me to say, like, something that focuses on understanding community development. That could be even just advocacy, but also economics, or, like you said, land use, but also, for instance, any kind of other nonprofit that's adjacent to land use. So folks who have experience working with those experiencing homelessness, that would be really important to better understand the critical condition that our housing market is in, and then also the different tools that may be available from outside of the regulatory environment, but really other tools that may be available for city staff to pursue and integrate into our plans.
Someone from neighborhoods that's really involved in neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think an organizer, neighborhood representative to today when we were talking through the presentation from staff. I feel like there is a disconnect between land use and how it may impact neighborhoods. There's a lot of, we often hear their concerns by the neighborhoods, and having somebody who can speak with specificity about what those concerns might be could be very beneficial to our work.
I don't know exactly how to put this, but I appreciate some of what I'm hearing around enthusiasm for folks being a part of this commission who bring different skill sets to the table. I feel like I'm going to fumble this if I'm not just direct. I do not come to this position with the same level of expertise on reading site plans, understanding the UDO, reading code that a lot of y'all, I feel like, brought. And that at multiple times was particularly challenging for me to feel like I was welcome as a member of this commission. And I'm pleased that y'all are expressing, in particular you, Commissioner Wheatley, an enthusiasm for bringing folks who don't bring that exact set of expertise, but I would challenge you, if you all are going to welcome someone who doesn't come with the same sort of skill sets that is typically expected of knowing how to read a site plan or understanding what any of those hash marks mean on that thing up there, like having and extending some more grace to those folks in how long it takes to learn some of that and to be an effective contributing member of this commission in other ways while they are getting up to speed on that. I mean, you mentioned a training program that you're hoping staff is working towards, and y'all did send me to School of Government trainings. It was great. There was like a onboarding. I went to trainings. They were very helpful. I was grateful for them. There were still months of meetings in which I was like, I do not know what you guys are talking about, right? Like, it is just a lot to hold and to grapple with. So I appreciate that enthusiasm for a diverse skill set coming to the table. I also just challenge you to to be really willing to sit with and hold someone's lack of experience and expertise and knowledge on some of these really wonky, complicated things.
Very helpful, very helpful, really.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for sharing that.
But I feel like I've heard a lot of good feedback. We can kind of continue the conversation, and if anyone has reviewed the applicants and wants to send council some feedback, I'm sure they would be interested to hear it. Well,
So are we sending council our feedback? We send it to you, you pass on, like what?
I guess, yeah, send it through me is
Okay.
how they have typically done
You
it.
gotta take some time, there's a lot of,
Yeah, there's a lot.
to go through.
I've gone through, yeah, half of them. Got another half to go.
But I'm happy
I've
to
gone there too.
kind of, I'm happy to be kind of a conduit, unfiltered. And,
Got it.
you know, whatever people send me, I will literally relay back. But I think this has helped kind of maybe, or it's helped me orient on what lens I should take when looking through all the applications. So appreciate it.
Good deal.
Great, well,
Motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
All right.